Thank you. What an amazing morning it has been. I'm so glad to be here with you today on behalf of Kaiser Permanente as we finalize our preparations to open 3 new clinics in Santa Cruz County on January 1st. Since our inception over 70 years ago, we know that there's more value in preventing disease rather than simply treating it. And we recognize that keeping people well requires more than health care. That is why we have spent the last 2 years learning about the local community, its members, the natural beauty that makes this particular part of the world such an amazing place to live, work, and play. We're excited to continue learning now with a discussion from Greg Pepping and Jeanette Tuteli-Lewis on activating our rivers. As we all know, our rivers provide enormous potential to benefit our communities: water, fish, birds, recreational activities. I would like to first introduce Greg Pepping, Executive Director of the Coastal Watershed Council since 2009. Before that, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Uganda, a graduate researcher in environmental chemistry, and a member of the City of Santa Cruz Water Supply Advisory Committee. Greg is a recipient of the Nexty Award for his leadership in the formation of the San Lorenzo River Alliance. He currently serves on the City of Santa Cruz Planning Commission and is chair of the County of Santa Cruz Commission on the Environment. Please join me in welcoming Greg. Next, I would like to introduce Jeanette Tuteli-Lewis, CEO of Big Sur Land Trust since 2014. Previously, Jeanette was the executive director at the Sierra Foothill Conservancy. She received a degree in botany from the University of Hawaii and a master's in forest science from Oregon State University. Jeanette serves on the board of the California Council of Land Trusts and is a member of the National Land Trust Alliance Leadership Council. Welcome, Jeanette.
We're still in the morning, we realize that we're the last 2 folks before lunch, so we're cognizant of that. So I was really excited to be invited to come and speak at this economic forum, and really thrilled that the overarching theme is about well-being. The Big Sur Land Trust really believes that parks and open space and access to clean water are essential for community health. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit about the Carmel River and our work along the river and what we're doing there. So, whoops. There we go. Great. Okay, so the story of the Monterey Peninsula is directly tied to the Carmel River. From the early mission era all the way through today, we've been completely dependent upon this critical and narrow 26-mile stretch of water. While much of the tension has been around water supply and on projects to replace water supply, there's a forgotten history from natural hazards and threats, from impacts like flooding that really affects communities along the river, as well as threats from earthquakes impacting outdated facilities. We have infrastructure along the river that has outlived its usefulness and no longer meets the needs of our communities. One recent example, of course, is the San Clemente Dam, which was so filled with silt that its water storage capacity had been reduced by 95%. A second example is at the mouth of the Carmel River, where the current levees do not provide adequate flood control for nearby residents and businesses. We have an opportunity to address benefits for people while also increasing the health of the river for fish and wildlife habitat by taking a green infrastructure approach that works with natural processes rather than against them. The two projects that are underway that really exemplify this approach is the removal of the San Clemente Dam and the reroute of the river, and the Carmel River Floodplain Restoration and Environmental Enhancement Project, also known as Carmel River Free. Many of you may remember the floods, many of you may remember the floods from 1995 and 1998. The one thing that climate change experts can all agree on is that here in California, we are likely to face more intense storms and more frequent flood events in between longer periods of drought. There's already been incredible investment into the Carmel River thus far. There's been roughly almost $500 million invested into the Carmel River for replacement water supply projects, for dam removal, flood control, river corridor restoration, and open space acquisitions. The removal of the San Clemente Dam is perhaps the largest project on the river. Although the original purpose of this was to address seismic safety issues, CalAm and the Coastal Conservancy and NOAA were able to turn this more standard dam removal project into a groundbreaking project that restores natural sediment flows and ultimately benefits 25 miles of river habitat. Like much of the infrastructure that's around rivers here in the US today, the infrastructure along the Carmel River was built before we really had a good understanding of the consequences of disconnecting our rivers from their natural floodplains. The Carmel River Free project is a public-private partnership between the Big Sur Land Trust, Monterey County, private landowners, regional parks, Caltrans, and other state and federal funding agencies. This green infrastructure project that's at the mouth of the river will reduce flooding impacts to local businesses and residents by restoring the floodplain, removing portions of the levee, and reconnecting the river to the lagoon under a causeway that will go under Highway 1. Other benefits include improved riparian and steelhead habitat, increased groundwater storage, raising a historical agricultural field out of the floodplain, and developing trails that connect to our world-class parks. There are several great projects that are going on in the lower part of the Carmel River, and I encourage you to get to know them. These efforts are about restoring the river, safeguarding our natural resources, and connecting people with trails across landowner jurisdictions. The Big Sur Land Trust is working in collaboration with many of our partners across the river. This is, after all, one river system, and it needs to be managed as such. There are a few things that we can all be doing as individuals to engage and reconnect with our rivers. It really begins with understanding the story of our own river and understanding its journey to our tap. You can also participate and get involved in local planning efforts that are both public agency-led as well as community-led processes. And you can support local nonprofits that are working on river issues that you really care about. It's paramount that we all recognize that caring for our rivers is not a choice between environment and people or environment and the economy. Many of the best projects benefit both, and we should all be advocating for those win-win solutions. Thank you.
I think we're past noon, so I'll say good afternoon. I stand between you and lunch, and before we do that, I want to take you a little bit further north and take you a little bit back in time. 1769 is when the Spanish explorers came and first found the San Lorenzo River. They found local Waswas people near where the boardwalk is today. in a place that the Awaswas called Aulina. And Aulina means the place of red abalone. For a very long time, Spanish settlers, as the community grew, and everyone who came here to Santa Cruz, stayed up on high ground at Villa Branciforte and the Santa Cruz Mission. But I like to say we were seduced by the river as we grew. And eventually we came down into the lower areas and we settled the floodplain where downtown Santa Cruz and surrounding neighborhoods are today. We had an identity with the river as we settled it. We spent time by the river. Starting in about the 1840s, we had 100 years of boom and bust. Boom because we had a connection to the river. It was part of our recreation. It was part of our quality of life. We had, these next couple of photos are of the Venetian Arts Festival. Imagine getting a permit for this activity today. My slides are jumping around on me, so forgive me for that. But this is how the river was really a part of the local quality of life, and it was a part of the economy. You can see all these fishermen because there was abundance. There was coho salmon and steelhead trout abundant in the river, and it was a driver for the economy because people came from all over to fill the hotels and the restaurants and saloons. And so we had Boomtown punctuated by busts, and a bust was when it would flood. So that we had that period after period, and we'd recover and rebuild after a flood, and so then more boom. And that cycle repeated until the big one. And around here, people refer to the big one as Loma Prieta. But in fact, the big one for the San Lorenzo River was in 1955, the Christmas flood. And local leaders decided what you may have decided if you were in charge. They said never again. So we had our first levees project, an Army Corps of Engineers project within the first few years. The levees have been improved a number of times since then, and they are doing their job today, keeping the water in the banks of the river. And we're safe, and they're doing their job. They're also emotionally keeping us from having a connection to the river. Now we're Surf City. We are no longer a river town, right? Psychologically, we are not drawn to the river. And even visually, we're disconnected from the river. This is what the lower river looks like today. The city is working very hard every day to manage the lower river. And throughout this largest watershed in the county, there are a number of projects to restore the watershed. This river that's almost 30 miles long. While there's a lot of hard work by federal, state, and local agencies and nonprofits and individuals, we also know that that is not enough. There's much more to be done. And the Coastal Watershed Council, where I work, believes that one of the missing pieces is a constituency. A constituency of people who really care about the river, who know what it means to our livelihoods, who realize that 100,000 people still rely on this water for drinking water. It's critical for habitat, and it's a driver of economic activity, who realize that in many places like Paris and Rome and London, in Providence and Chicago and Oklahoma City, in Boulder and Napa and Redding, and even in Los Angeles, they have a thriving urban riverfront. You like that idea? That's possible in Santa Cruz. The Coastal Watershed Council was working on that by getting kids down to the river to learn about birds and fish and bugs and trees. We're getting families to the river to learn about pollution and the solutions to that, to learn about fish life cycles and about sources of pollution and the difference between invasive and native species. We have volunteers tracking who's using the city park, the Santa Cruz Riverwalk, and for which activity. And we're tracking positive and negative press mentions because the river has a bad reputation, and we believe that we need to change the view of the river so that we have hope and belief that it could happen, that it could change like those places you've seen and that you've been to. And we need to measure that. If you like that idea, I want you to know that you are a part of it. You have a role. How many of you know which watershed you live in? Raise your hand. Pretty good numbers. How many of you know which aquifer from which you get your drinking water, if that's the case? Pretty good numbers. We need a constituency of water-literate residents. That's what we need as a constituency. And we did an awesome job in this region, throughout the region, conserving water throughout the drought. And we're not done celebrating that. Let's give ourselves a hand for that. I hope you still feel good about that, because you should. We probably need to make those habits and those infrastructure improvements permanent. Because if there's not water in any of these rivers, it's a pretty short conversation. More water for baby fish is a short way to say it. Tell your kids that. So if you have a role, and that is conserving water. Another thing you can do is follow what the city of Santa Cruz is doing along the lower San Lorenzo River. This slide shows some proposed changes to the downtown plan, which has been approved by the Planning Commission and will go to City Council within the next few months. And if you like this idea, please share with City Council what you think of these ideas. There are ways to develop the riverfront in a responsible way that actually can benefit the habitat of the river. And this shot is of a scene that is actually illegal. Because of an outdated ordinance, it is illegal to paddle the San Lorenzo River, and we're in a holding pattern while we study whether we can do this in the right way without harming habitat. So I will tell you that not everyone likes these ideas of change. In Santa Cruz, we're quite famous for saying no way. We're proud of ourselves, some of us, for stopping development and for stopping change because we really like how this community is. If you want change, you really need to balance out those voices that say no way and say we can have a new way. And so City Council needs to hear from you as they consider an ordinance change to this and as they consider an ordinance, downtown plan amendments that they'll consider in the next few months. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do, because you like the idea of transforming this river, is to go to the river. Go to the San Lorenzo River or go to whatever river is nearest you. Imagine for a second right now the first moment you had when you were a kid or maybe you were a young adult. That first moment where you had a really cool, moving experience in nature. Go back to that place or go back to that space in you and reconnect to that. Make that happen for your kids. You need a break from screen time, I bet. I bet your kids do. We all do. Fall in love with nature again and reconnect with the river that's closest to you. If you do that, you will be a part of that constituency that I'm talking about. You'll be a part of this local success story. And if you do that, you will help Santa Cruz's future be as connected to the river as our past has been. And you'll be a part of the constituency who is reconnecting a healthy watershed to a vibrant community. Thank you. We're going to ask some questions of each other, and then we will, just like the other sessions, have an opportunity for you to ask questions of us. Jeanette has agreed to take the challenging questions, and I'll get the easy ones. So prepare your questions, and the mic will be coming to you soon. I think I'm first. Is that right? Yes. So we work in different parts of the Bay, and I'd like to hear from you, if you could share with people maybe some of the similarities and differences between these two rivers and how those similarities or differences can help each of us and people working on similar efforts in different places.
Sure. So I believe that we, both rivers support about the same number of people, about 100,000 or so. And, you know, I think one of the big differences is that as I understand, that in Santa Cruz County, that there's a lot of the water supply is really about being able to drought-proof the new projects that they're looking at, as opposed to in Monterey County where it's really been mandated. We need water replacement. We're in a much dire situation in some ways. And the State Water Board has intervened. And so that has really required, I think, Monterey County or the peninsula to be very, I think it's pushed us a bit farther along in water replacement projects. And there's been some innovation that's really come out as a result of that. Also, the lower portion of the river is less developed than in Santa Cruz County. So in Carmel, we're fortunate that we have significant open space on the south side of the river, and the Big Sur Land Trust has been very intentional about making sure that there are open space corridors. And that gives us a lot more flexibility in how we look at restoring the river, in the sense that we don't have as much hardscape as you have there in the San Lorenzo River. So, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the land use differences within the watershed are some of the obvious differences. The lower San Lorenzo is urban and impacted, and then the other thing that's I think people forget or don't know how actually densely developed some parts of the upper watershed are as well. One of the lessons I think from the Carmel that I hope we and others can learn from, are that with the dam removal, it really wasn't a bunch of people successfully saying we've got to let the fish pass. It was a seismic threat, and it was no longer serving as reservoir capacity. So that's helped fish, and yet it wasn't the driver of fish, the fish conversation that helped that. So we're looking for, similarly with the water supply conversation, since 100,000 people rely on that, on the San Lorenzo for water, it's not a fish or people thing. We've got to balance both of those, and there are some similarities to the Carmel for that.
So I have a question for you. How do you restore a river and connect a community to it in an urban setting?
Well, I think one of the things that I think we have to do is stop pretending. For the San Lorenzo, particularly in the lower river, we need to stop pretending that it's a wild and scenic river and recognize that it is not an either or with regard to do we make this pristine and get it back to the way it was. That's probably not going to happen, but there are opportunities to enhance the habitat, and that is driven by getting people to the river. Mm-hmm. We only care for what we know, and too many people are repelled from the San Lorenzo and not drawn to it. So we try to have as many positive activities down at the river as we can. We do need police and an enforcement presence and rangers to make it safe, but that only gets you from negative to neutral, and from neutral to a fun environment where you have this great urban park. Instead of a drainage ditch, you could have this great urban park. Instead of this back alley feel, you could have our front yard as a community, and that is through the many activities we have. And so we want people to go to the river. They can go to sanlorenzo.org to learn about the different activities, and we want you to go on your own. And the last photo that I left with was ebb and flow of June a year and a half ago, and this June will be our third ebb and flow River Arts Festival held by the Arts Council, and we partner with them and others. So reconnecting the community, I think it's important for us all to name that we're going to get people down to the rivers. At least that's part of our story. What about you?
Well, I would agree. I think that developing a sense of belonging to the river is really important, because I think it's that sense of belonging that really drives us to any kind of action that we decide to take on. I'd also say that there are sometimes opportunities to participate in community vision processes for rivers and river parkways. In 2005, the Big Sur Land Trust led one for the Carmel River. And it was really wonderful because you have very diverse stakeholders, and so you've got a lot of people that are really interested in participating, and people who just show up and may not have had some initial interest in the river, but sort of learn through the process about all the possibilities that are that can happen. When you bring people to the river, when you provide trails and access, and also what it means for our river's health as well. So I'm full agreement with you on that.
Okay.
So.
Is this clock what we have for time remaining? I'm looking for
I
someone
think
to
it
guide
might
us.
be for general questions as well. So.
Okay.
So we wanna, I don't know if
maybe
we might
can
want to
prep
open it up.
for,
Or,
an audience question. Do we have the mics ready?
yes. Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you for that. My name is Shyam Kamath. I'm from CSU Monterey Bay. My question has to do with the vision that you especially were promoting, but I think both of you are wanting to make the river the center of the community and a part of the community. But I'm wondering how you see the potential for raising the resources and providing the enjoyment through developing both rivers and the region as a region for ecotourism and eco-recreation. Are there any thoughts or visions or plans to do that?
Tough question. The question was about how to generate the resources. 2 years ago, California voters passed the water bond, Prop 1, and that has, I think, $7.5 billion that they'll roll out in 6 or 8 or 10 years. And some of those monies will be available. That doesn't solve all of our problems. I think it's particularly challenging to get federal money. Private foundations may be part of the solution. I actually think we're probably going to need a local funding source, whether that's a ballot measure or some creative assessment district for the lower river. And that, I don't know that we're politically there yet, but that's something that I'm considering and imagining how to craft. That's not something we've been a part of, so that's a growth area for our community and certainly for the Coastal Watershed Council. We've not been there, done that. So that's a good question that I don't have. Those are the best answers I have to that. I don't know. You have all your money issues solved?
No. Well, in fact, we have about for our Carmel River floodplain restoration project, we have about a $11 million gap that we're still looking at funding. It's about a $28 million project. And so, we are looking at lots of different resources. We're looking at both state and federal resources. We also look at private funding as well. We have a fund at the Community Foundation to assist with all the private philanthropy that will be going into the project. And, I think that there are a lot of, I think when people see the value of the rivers, and I think it's easy to see that as, if you are driving, through Monterey into Carmel, and, it's really the gateway to Big Sur. It is a beloved region of the world. And there are a lot, I think, of resources available to, fund one of the most stunning landscapes. And I think the Central Coast is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And so I think there's a lot of people that really care about these landscapes that are outside of the region. And so, we are seeing resources coming from outside the region as well to look at how we restore these lands. So,
the other thing that I would add is that the photo that I showed, the schematic I showed of the downtown plan amendments will take it's a public-private partnership. So that's another source of resources is private development. And another type of investor is philanthropy. So our work right now is driven by donations from communities, individuals, and businesses. So I didn't want to fail to state that. Do we have another question from the audience?
We would love for these conversations to continue over lunch. So we want to thank our two speakers, Greg and Jeanette.